congratulations. You've just become a samurai in feudal Japan, elite warrior, upholder of Bushido, living embodiment of honor, discipline, and perfection. At least that's the ideal everyone expects you to embody. The reality? You're about to spend your life caught between impossible standards and actual human nature, between the perfect warrior you're supposed to be and the flawed person you actually are. You'll train until your body breaks, then train more. You'll face death in battle while trying to maintain perfect honor. You'll write poetry even though you're terrible at it. You'll maintain appearances of discipline while drinking heavily with fellow warriors. You'll navigate complex relationships with masters, wives, concubines, and geisha, while pretending your life is solely about duty. You'll kill other human beings and then process that trauma through sake and brotherhood. Welcome to the conflicted life of a samurai. It's going to be demanding, meaningful, violent, and filled with contradictions you'll spend decades trying to reconcile. Becoming samurai. Masters and students. The path to becoming samurai typically began young, around age 7 or 8, when boys from samurai families entered formal training. This wasn't optional. It was destiny, obligation, family expectation. From the moment training began, the message was clear. You are different from other people, and you will be held to different standards that will shape every aspect of your existence. Early training focused on fundamentals that would build foundation for everything ahead. Physical conditioning, running, climbing, swimming, building strength and endurance needed for combat in armor. Basic weapons, handling with wooden practice swords, learning proper grip, stance, fundamental strikes, etiquette and behavior. How to sit properly, how to speak to superiors, how to conduct oneself with dignity appropriate to samurai class. But even more than physical skills, early training emphasized mindset and identity. Samurai weren't just warriors. They were living representatives of ideals, honor, loyalty, self-discipline, courage. These weren't abstract concepts but daily expectations with real consequences when violated. Young trainees learned quickly that reputation was everything, that shame was worse than death, that failure reflected not just on themselves but on their families and masters for generations. The relationship between student and master was foundation of samurai education and would define the young warrior's entire development. A boy would be assigned to or adopted by an older, experienced samurai who became responsible for his complete education. Not just combat training, but everything: philosophy, culture, behavior, values, understanding of what it meant to live as samurai. This mentorship was profound and all-encompassing in ways that went beyond simple instruction. The bond that formed between master and student was considered essential to warrior development. Masters invested years in their students, shaping not just their skills, but their characters, their understanding of honor, their approach to life and death. Students devoted themselves completely to their masters, learning through observation, instruction, and constant proximity. They lived together, trained together, traveled together. The relationship was intimate in every sense. This mentorship system, Bushido, the way of youth, was accepted part of samurai culture that outsiders often misunderstood. The master taught everything, and the student learned everything. The relationship included not just martial and cultural education, but also physical intimacy as part of complete training in all aspects of warrior life. This wasn't considered unusual or wrong within samurai society. It was understood as part of how knowledge, values, and warrior spirit were transmitted from one generation to the next. Young samurai absorbed their master's philosophies, fighting styles, preferences, and approaches to existence. They learned to anticipate needs, understand unspoken communication, move in harmony with their teachers. The bond was deep and genuine, creating loyalty that often lasted lifetimes. By the time a young samurai was ready to establish his own household and marry, which he would do, for producing heirs was essential duty, he'd spent years in this intensive apprenticeship that shaped his fundamental understanding of relationships, loyalty, and what it meant to serve completely. Training itself was rigorous beyond what most modern people could comprehend. Hours daily of weapons practice, kenjutsu, sword techniques, practiced until movements became automatic, until the sword felt like extension of body rather than separate tool. The repetition was mind-numbing. Same strike performed 1,000 times. Correction for tiny imperfection. Repeat. Still wrong. Again. The master's voice constant. Your stance is weak. Your grip is incorrect. Your spirit is not focused. Again. Takeshi, training under strict master, discovered that perfect form in solo practice meant nothing against actual opponent. His first sparring session ended with him bruised, humbled, and understanding that practice was preparation, but adaptation was survival. His training partner, more experienced and far less gentle than expected, exploited every opening. Takeshi learned more in that painful session than in months of solo practice. Physical conditioning was relentless and purposeful. Running long distances in full armor, swimming in armor to prepare for river crossings that would happen during campaigns, climbing, jumping, carrying heavy loads, standing in freezing water for extended periods while maintaining meditation posture, building mental discipline to ignore physical discomfort. The training was designed to develop bodies capable of extraordinary endurance and minds that could push past normal human limitations. But samurai training wasn't just physical. Zazen, seated meditation, was regular practice. Hours spent sitting perfectly still, learning to quiet mind, control thoughts, develop focus that couldn't be broken by distraction or fear. This mental discipline was considered as important as physical conditioning. A warrior with strong body but weak mind was incomplete and would fail when true test came. The meditation created its own challenges, sitting motionless for hours while master walked around checking posture. Any movement meant correction. The mind was supposed to be empty and calm. Instead, young samurais' minds were typically filled with, "My leg is cramping. Don't move. It's cramping so badly. Don't move. I have to move. Don't move." The irony that trying to achieve empty mind created mental chaos was not lost on those struggling through the practice. Cultural training continued alongside martial preparation, calligraphy practice, hours spent perfecting brush strokes, learning to write with aesthetic beauty, poetry composition, struggling to craft haiku that captured moment perfectly in exactly 17 syllables. Tea ceremony practice, learning elaborate ritual that could take years to perform properly. These cultural pursuits weren't optional extras, but essential components of being complete samurai. This created constant tension. Most young samurai were better at fighting than poetry. Learning to swing sword came more naturally than learning to craft perfect verse. But both were required. The pressure to excel at everything, combat, culture, behavior, everything, was enormous and never-ending. Hiroshi excelled at sword work but was hopeless at poetry. His attempts included gems like, "The sword is sharp. I hold it in my hand now. It is very sharp." His master's response was patient silence, followed by, "Perhaps more practice is needed." Hiroshi practiced poetry for 3 more years without significant improvement. The burden of Bushido, impossible standards. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was the code that governed samurai behavior and defined their identity. It wasn't written law but understood set of principles that every samurai was expected to embody perfectly despite the impossibility of doing so. These principles sounded noble in theory. In practice, they created immense pressure and constant internal conflict that every samurai carried throughout life. The 7 virtues of Bushido were drilled into every samurai from childhood. Gi, righteousness and justice. Yu, courage and bravery. Jin, benevolence and compassion. Rei, respect and courtesy. Makoto, honesty and sincerity. Meiyo, honor and glory. Chugi, loyalty and devotion. These weren't suggestions or goals, they were requirements that defined whether you were truly samurai or merely pretending. Righteousness meant always doing what was right, regardless of personal cost. In theory, admirable. In practice, what was right was often unclear, and the cost could be everything you valued. Samurai faced situations where righteousness conflicted with loyalty, where justice opposed orders from superiors, where doing right meant certain death. The code provided ideals, but not always clear answers to actual dilemmas. Courage was expected constantly, not just in battle but in daily life. Facing challenges without showing fear, accepting punishment without complaint, volunteering for dangerous missions, refusing to back down even when overwhelmed. A samurai who showed cowardice once carried that stain forever. The pressure to appear brave, even when terrified, was psychologically exhausting and never-ending. Honor was everything, more important than life itself. A samurai's reputation was his most valuable possession. Protecting honor meant avoiding any action that could bring shame. This created constant vigilance. Every decision had to be evaluated for potential honor implications. Every interaction carried risk of inadvertent dishonor. The weight of maintaining reputation was a crushing burden that affected every choice. Loyalty, chugi, was perhaps most emphasized virtue, absolute devotion to one's lord, following orders without question, sacrificing everything for master's benefit. This loyalty was supposed to override even self-preservation. A samurai was expected to die for his lord, without hesitation. This wasn't metaphor. It was literal expectation that many samurai fulfilled, creating widows and fatherless children in service of abstract ideal. But loyalty created impossible problems. What if orders were wrong? What if the lord was cruel or unjust? Bushido said loyalty came first, but righteousness also mattered. When these principles conflicted, and they often did, what then? Samurai grappled with these contradictions throughout their lives, trying to honor code that sometimes contradicted itself, while maintaining appearance of perfect adherence. The reality was that living perfectly according to Bushido was impossible. Samurai were human. They felt fear, anger, desire, weakness. They made mistakes. They fell short of ideals constantly. But admitting this was itself failure. So samurai lived with constant internal conflict, striving for perfection while knowing it was unattainable, maintaining appearance of embodying ideals while privately struggling with very human limitations that could never be acknowledged publicly. Sake, social life and complicated relationships. Samurai social life was a complex mix of formal hierarchy and surprisingly indulgent behavior that contradicted the image of perfect discipline. The class structure was rigid, but within samurai ranks, social dynamics created both bonding and competition, honor and excess existing simultaneously in ways that would seem hypocritical if anyone acknowledged the contradiction openly. Sake drinking was central to samurai culture in ways that might surprise those who imagined disciplined warriors maintaining constant perfect control. The reality was that samurai drank heavily and regularly. Sake flowed at gatherings, ceremonies, before battles, after battles, during social bonding, and essentially any time samurai gathered. The discipline and control emphasized in Bushido apparently had significant exceptions, and alcohol was a major one that nobody questioned. Drinking served multiple purposes, all considered legitimate. Before battle, sake provided courage, liquid bravery that helped warriors face death with required composure. After battle, sake helped process trauma, grief, and relief of survival. During peacetime, drinking was social bonding activity that reinforced relationships and allowed hierarchy to loosen slightly in ways that sober interactions couldn't permit. A samurai who couldn't hold his sake was mocked as weak. This created pressure to develop impressive alcohol tolerance. Young samurai learned to drink substantial amounts while maintaining composure, or at least maintaining appearance of composure. Stumbling was forgivable if you could still draw sword properly. Vomiting was acceptable if you resumed drinking afterward. Passing out was problematic but survivable if you'd been impressive before losing consciousness. The drinking competitions were serious affairs that tested endurance as rigorously as any combat training. Who could drink most? Who could drink and still function effectively? Who passed out first? These contests were taken seriously, with outcomes remembered and discussed for years. Winning drinking competitions brought genuine respect. Losing brought mockery that could last decades and become a permanent part of your identity. Kenji, skilled swordsman with unfortunately low alcohol tolerance, became known throughout his lord's service as two-cup Kenji, after passing out during drinking competition following just 2 large cups of sake. His actual name became irrelevant. For the next 20 years, everyone called him two-cup Kenji. He remained excellent swordsman and served honorably, but his reputation never fully recovered from that one evening. This was medieval Japan's version of permanent social media, no screenshots. But people remembered everything forever and would never let you forget your worst moment. Training with hangovers was normal experience, particularly after significant social events. The sake from last night's gathering still affecting coordination and focus, vision slightly blurry, stomach uncertain about its commitment to remaining calm, but training happened anyway without mercy or accommodation. Complaining about hangover was weakness. Masters showed no sympathy for self-inflicted impairment. Draw your sword properly despite headache pounding with each movement. Execute forms correctly despite nausea threatening with each turn. This was discipline, not avoiding excess but functioning perfectly despite it. Successful samurai of sufficient rank maintained households that reflected their status in ways that went beyond simple family structure. For higher-ranking samurai, this meant more than just a wife. Multiple concubines were status symbol and practical arrangement that everyone understood and accepted as normal for samurai of appropriate standing. The main wife, usually from noble family chosen for political alliance, managed the household and bore legitimate heirs who would inherit position and property. Concubines provided companionship, bore additional children who had different status but weren't considered illegitimate in Western sense, and reflected the samurai's success. Having concubines announced to society, "I am successful enough to maintain complex household. I have achieved status where multiple women find my patronage desirable." This household arrangement wasn't hidden or shameful. It was expected for samurai of sufficient status and means. The inability to support multiple women implied insufficient rank or resources. The main wife often managed the concubines, organizing household, delegating responsibilities, maintaining order among what could become complex social dynamics. "You'll attend to the Lord Monday and Wednesday. She'll take Tuesday and Thursday. I handle formal occasions." The organizational skills required were substantial, and not every wife managed this successfully. Relationships between main wives and concubines varied wildly. Some households functioned harmoniously with everyone understanding and accepting their positions. Others were nests of rivalry, jealousy, and political maneuvering that made the Lord's external political conflicts look simple by comparison. Smart samurai paid attention to household dynamics, because ignoring conflicts among the women in one's household was a mistake that created problems affecting everything else in life. Successful samurai also had access to entertainment districts where geisha performed. These weren't brothels. Those were separate establishments with different workers called oeran or yujo. Geisha were artists, conversationalists, musicians who provided entertainment and company. But the line between professional entertainment and personal intimacy was flexible and negotiated differently in each relationship. Visiting geisha houses was status display. Expensive, socially acceptable despite the implicit understanding. Your wife knew, everyone knew. The formality of "this is for cultural appreciation and artistic entertainment" was maintained, but everyone understood what cultural appreciation sometimes included beyond music and conversation. A samurai might have regular geisha he visited. She'd know his preferences, which sake, which topics to discuss, which songs he enjoyed, when he wanted conversation and when he wanted something else unstated but understood. Some relationships remained purely professional with clear boundaries. Others became deeply personal and complicated. Some samurai fell genuinely in love with geisha, creating impossible situations since neither could marry the other within existing social structure. The geisha evaluated samurai too. Rich but boring. She'd be professional but distant, giving minimum required performance. Interesting and generous. She might actually enjoy his company and show genuine warmth. Powerful and well-connected. She'd cultivate relationship carefully because geisha who pleased important samurai gained reputation that attracted more wealthy clients and elevated her own status within the profession. Other samurai judged based on which geisha accepted your attention. Being regular patron of renowned geisha elevated your status among peers. Being rejected by geisha everyone wanted. Social embarrassment whispered about at bathhouses and drinking gatherings where reputations were built and destroyed through collective gossip. Satoshi became regular patron of geisha named Kiyomi. Expensive but worth it, he thought. She was witty, talented, beautiful. He visited weekly, brought gifts, thought their relationship was special and unique, then discovered 3 other samurai from his own lord's service were also Kiyomi's special patrons. All 4 thought they were her favorite. None actually were. She was consummate professional managing multiple clients who all believed they had unique connection with her. The awkward moment came at banquet when all 4 sat together and slowly realized they'd all been describing same woman's unique laugh and special way she pours sake and meaningful glances. Kiyomi had never lied to any of them. They'd lied to themselves, seeing what they wanted to see. The other samurai in attendance found this hilarious. Satoshi's reputation never quite recovered. He learned expensive lesson about projecting emotions onto professional relationships. Samurai also participated in bathhouse culture, communal bathing that was both hygiene and essential social activity. Bathhouses were places where samurai gathered, relaxed, conversed, and conducted informal business. Status hierarchy loosened slightly in the baths where everyone was naked and theoretically equal. Conversations happened more freely, information was exchanged, alliances formed. The bathhouse was where you learned things that mattered. Which lord was falling out of favor with the shogun? Which samurai was rising in status? Who was sleeping with whose wife? Who'd been seen at which geisha house? Where the best sack could be acquired? What the merchant class was saying about recent policies? Information flowed in bathhouses as reliably as hot water, and smart samurai paid attention while appearing to simply relax. But bathhouses also created social hazards. Maintaining dignity while naked and wet was challenge. Avoiding giving offense while everyone was exposed and vulnerable required careful navigation of unspoken rules. The relaxed atmosphere could lead to oversharing or saying things that would be regretted once everyone was clothed and back in formal contexts. More than one samurai damaged his reputation through unguarded comments made in the false intimacy of the bathhouse, where he thought casual conversation wouldn't be remembered or repeated. It always was. Poetry, death poems, and cultural torture. If there was single aspect of samurai life that created universal stress regardless of rank or combat prowess, it was the poetry requirement. Every samurai was expected to be poet, not occasionally as hobby, as fundamental component of being complete samurai. The problem was that most samurai were terrible at poetry and knew it and had to do it anyway, because cultural expectations didn't care about actual ability. The 5-7-5 syllable structure of haiku sounds deceptively simple. 17 syllables capturing moment, season, emotion, philosophical insight. In practice, creating genuinely good haiku required poetic sensitivity, cultural knowledge, linguistic skill, and artistic sensibility that most warriors simply didn't possess. They could kill a man with sword. They could endure incredible physical hardship. They could maintain composure under extreme pressure. But they couldn't write decent poetry to save their lives, which was unfortunate because they literally had to write poetry before potentially dying. Death poems, jisei, were expected from samurai facing battle. These final verses were supposed to capture one's thoughts with wisdom and beauty, demonstrating understanding of impermanence and acceptance of mortality. The death poem became part of your legacy, shared after your death with family, friends, fellow warriors. It could cement your reputation forever, or it could make you look ridiculous forever. The permanence created paralysis for many would-be poets facing mortality while also facing blank paper. Yoshiro spent 3 days before major battle trying to compose adequate death poem. His attempts included, "Sword is sharp weapon. It can cut many things well, including people." His fellow samurai suggested perhaps more practice. Yoshiro practiced. His next attempt, "Cherry blossoms fall. They fall down from the tree now. They are on the ground." Technically correct structure. Poetically meaningful? Not particularly. Yoshiro survived that battle and continued practicing poetry for 30 more years without significant improvement. The pressure intensified because death poems were public. Everyone would hear your final verse. A brilliant death poem could secure immortal reputation. A terrible one would also be remembered immortally. Some samurai genuinely feared writing inadequate death poem more than they feared actual death. Death was quick, bad poetry was eternal. Literary gatherings where samurai composed poetry together were a particular form of torture for the poetically challenged. The gathering would establish theme. Each participant would compose haiku on that theme. Everyone would present their work. Polite appreciation would be expressed regardless of quality. But everyone remembered who wrote good poetry and who wrote terrible poetry, and these memories affected social standing and reputation beyond just literary circles. The campaign. Marching to war. When war came, and in feudal Japan's Sengoku period war came regularly, samurai faced the ultimate test of everything they'd trained for and all the ideals they claimed to embody. The conflict might be between rival daimyo fighting over territory, between clans settling old disputes, or between factions competing for power. The specifics varied. The reality of what samurai experienced remained brutally consistent. The call to campaign came through formal channels. Your lord required your service. The enemy was identified. Another daimyo's forces, perhaps a neighboring clan, sometimes former allies turned enemies through shifting political alliances. Refusal wasn't option. This was the purpose of your existence, the reason you trained constantly, the obligation that came with your status, and the land or stipend that supported you. Preparation was extensive and nerve-wracking. Armor had to be checked piece by piece, every strap inspected, every plate examined for damage or weakness. Weapons sharpened to proper edge, not too sharp because over-sharp blades chipped easily, but sharp enough to be effective. Supplies organized, arrangements made for household during absence, messages sent to family in case of death. The practical preparations mixed with psychological preparation that was harder and more personal. Some samurai performed private rituals, meditation to calm mind and accept death as possibility, prayer to ancestors for protection and courage, writing letters to be delivered only if they didn't return, sake drinking with fellow samurai about to march together, bonding ritual and coping mechanism simultaneously. The brotherhood formed between men about to face death together was profound in ways that peacetime relationships couldn't match. The march to campaign could take days or weeks, depending on distance. Samurai traveled with their ashigaru, foot soldiers from peasant class who formed bulk of army. The samurai were elite minority commanding and fighting alongside these lower-class warriors. The relationship was complex, mutual dependence mixed with social separation. Samurai relied on ashigaru in battle, but maintained distance enforcing class distinctions, even while sharing hardships of campaign. The march itself was exhausting, moving in armor even when not fighting, carrying or transporting equipment, dealing with weather, terrain, inadequate supplies, sleeping on ground, eating simple rations. The glory of warfare that people imagined was absent from the actual experience of getting to battlefield. That part was just miserable for everyone regardless of class. During March, reality of what was coming settled on everyone. Conversations became more serious. Jokes continued, but with edge of desperation. Samurai checked each other's equipment, helping with adjustments, making sure everyone was prepared. The masters and former students often sought each other out during these times, reconnecting, sharing final words that might need to be final. The bonds formed through years of training took on new meaning when death became immediate possibility rather than abstract concept. As they neared the battlefield, the atmosphere changed completely. Final preparations became urgent, armor adjusted one last time, weapons checked again, formation assignments reviewed. The samurai and ashigaru arranged themselves according to plan. Cavalry here, spearmen there, archers in position, reserves ready. The organization required to move thousands of men into combat positions was impressive, but couldn't completely mask the fear everyone felt, regardless of training or experience. The night before battle was the longest night for many. Some samurai spent it in prayer. Others drank to calm nerves or achieve numbness that would help tomorrow. Some sat with close friends, sharing memories, making promises to look after families if they didn't survive. A few wrote final letters or refined their death poems one last time. Most simply waited, trying not to think too much about what morning would bring while being unable to think about anything else. Sake was distributed before battle, liquid courage that was accepted part of combat preparation. Not enough to impair fighting ability, but enough to dull the edge of fear that everyone felt. Even experienced samurai who'd fought many times felt fear before battle. The difference was they'd learned to function despite it, to channel it into focus and aggression rather than let it paralyze. Younger samurai learned by watching the veterans who appeared calm, trying to emulate that composure even while terrified internally. Battle. Honor tested in chaos. Dawn came, and with it the reality of combat. The enemy forces were visible across the field. Rival samurai wearing different colors, flying different banners, serving different lords but trained similarly and equipped similarly to yourself. They were warriors like you. They followed Bushido like you. They would try to kill you like you would try to kill them. The abstraction of training became concrete reality of humans trying to end each other's existence. The battle began with formalities that seemed absurd given what was about to happen. Commanders shouted declarations, challenges issued. Sometimes individual samurai would fight duels before main engagement. These rituals served purpose, establishing courage, intimidating enemies, maintaining appearance of honor even at edge of mass violence. Then formalities ended and chaos began. The Ashigaru engaged first. Mass formations of spearmen clashing, archers loosing volleys. The samurai charged, cavalry thundering forward or advancing on foot, depending on terrain and tactics. The noise was overwhelming. Thousands of men shouting, weapons clashing, horses screaming, wounded crying out. The sensory overload was disorienting even with training. Visibility through helmet was limited. Dust and smoke obscured vision further. Hearing was muffled by armor and drowned by cacophony. Training took over because conscious thought was impossible in the chaos. Strike, defend, move, watch for threats. The techniques practiced thousands of times became automatic responses that didn't require decision-making. This automatic function was both blessing and curse. It kept you alive, but also meant killing became a mechanical act that your mind processed differently than it would have if fully conscious of every action. The fighting was nothing like the elegant swordplay of stories. It was brutal, exhausting, messy. Hitting armored opponent required tremendous force. Breaking through armor was extremely difficult. Most killing happened through vulnerabilities, gaps in armor, fallen opponents, overwhelmed enemies. The reality was far from the idealized combat of imagination. It was violence, chaos, desperate survival. The exhaustion was crushing. Fighting in armor, even briefly, demanded enormous effort. Extended combat pushed bodies past normal limits. Muscles burned. Breathing became labored. Sweat soaked clothing under armor, and fighting continued because stopping meant dying. Adrenaline helped, but only went so far. Eventually, pure will kept bodies moving past any reasonable capacity, driven by survival instinct and ingrained discipline that wouldn't permit surrender to exhaustion. Men died. Friends fell. The samurai beside you one moment might be gone the next. Processing this during combat was impossible. Grief would come later if you survived. During battle, there was only movement forward, next threat, immediate survival. The psychological compartmentalization required was extraordinary. Some handled it through training and discipline. Others dissociated partially, fighting while mentally distant from actions. All carried the experience differently, but all carried it permanently. The honor emphasized in Bushido seemed distant during actual combat. Survival instincts overrode idealistic principles. Samurai did what worked to stay alive, striking fallen enemies, taking advantages that weren't exactly honorable, fighting dirty when necessary. The conflict between what they were supposed to do and what they actually did created psychological burden that would be processed later, assuming later arrived. The brotherhood formed in combat was deepest bond samurai experienced. Men who fought beside you, protected you, survived with you, became connected in ways that transcended normal friendship. You'd seen each other at absolute worst and best simultaneously. You'd trusted each other with your lives literally. These bonds lasted lifetimes and shaped relationships permanently. When fighting ended, through victory, defeat, or exhaustion of both sides, The battlefield assessment began. Who survived? Who fell? How badly were wounded injured? Samurai searched for comrades, dreading finding them among the dead, relieved when finding them alive. The mixture of relief at personal survival and grief for those who hadn't survived created overwhelming emotional experience that many struggled to process immediately. Victory brought celebration but also reflection. Those who survived understood they'd been fortunate as much as skilled. Gratitude to gods or ancestors was genuine. Samurai believed divine favor mattered in survival. Some felt guilt about surviving when others hadn't. Most felt profound appreciation for life, for brothers who fought beside them, for simply being alive to see another day. The aftermath involved grim work, caring for wounded, identifying dead, collecting belongings to return to families. The samurai who'd been warriors moments before became mourners and caretakers. This transition from combat to compassion was jarring but necessary. Bodies had to be dealt with respectfully. Wounded needed help. The practical necessities of after battle continued for hours or days. Sake flowed again after battle, serving different purpose than before. Now it helped process trauma, numb pain both physical and psychological, bond with survivors through shared experience that outsiders couldn't understand. The drinking sessions after combat were where samurai actually processed what they'd experienced, talking about fears felt, near misses survived, friends lost, enemies killed. These conversations didn't follow Bushido's formal standards. They were raw, honest, human reactions to inhuman experiences. The return from campaign was complex emotionally. Relief at survival. Grief carried for those who didn't return. Readjustment to normal life after experiencing combat intensity. Many samurai struggled with this transition. Peacetime felt hollow after war's intensity. Normal problems seemed trivial. Sleep was difficult, haunted by memories. The psychological impact of combat was real and lasting. Though samurai culture didn't have vocabulary or framework for discussing trauma the way modern psychology does. The aging samurai, reflection and wisdom. Samurai who survived to old age, and fewer did than anyone hoped, gained perspective on the conflicts and contradictions they'd navigated throughout life. Age brought wisdom but also clear view of gap between ideal and reality, between who they'd tried to be and who they'd actually been. The perfect warrior of Bushido ideals didn't exist in reality. What existed were imperfect men who tried their best within an impossible system. Older samurai often became mentors themselves, training the next generation just as they'd been trained. This role carried profound responsibility. They weren't just teaching combat techniques, but transmitting values, culture, understanding of what it meant to be samurai. How they mentored shaped not just individual students, but the warrior class's future. Some taught the ideals strictly. Others taught the ideals while also preparing students for the reality that ideals and practice diverged significantly. Physical decline was particularly difficult for those whose identity was built on martial prowess. Bodies that had been honed weapons began failing, reflexes slowed, strength diminished, old injuries flared with age and weather changes. Morning stiffness became a serious issue affecting basic movement. For warriors who defined themselves through physical capability, aging was ego blow as much as practical limitation. They had to find new ways to contribute, new sources of identity and value beyond combat effectiveness. Many older samurai found meaning in cultural pursuits they'd struggled with when younger. Poetry that seemed pointless burden during youth took on different significance with age and perspective gained through decades of experience. Tea ceremony became genuine meditation rather than tedious obligation. Calligraphy offered a way to maintain discipline when physical training was no longer possible. The cultural components of samurai life that had seemed peripheral revealed their importance with time. The accumulated conflicts and contradictions of samurai life came into clearer focus with age. Older samurai could see patterns younger ones couldn't. They understood that the struggle between ideal and reality wasn't personal failing, but inherent tension everyone faced. This wisdom, hard-earned through decades of experience, was a valuable lesson to pass to students still struggling with same conflicts that never really resolved, but only became more manageable through acceptance. Relationships with family deepened or became strained depending on choices made throughout life. Samurai who'd prioritized duty over family relationships sometimes found themselves isolated in old age. Those who'd maintained connections despite demands of service had family support as compensation for physical decline. Children grown and serving themselves, grandchildren beginning their own training. The legacy continued through generations, each building on or reacting against what came before. Conclusion: the burden and meaning of the way. Being a samurai meant living with profound contradiction between impossible ideals and human reality. Bushido demanded perfection, perfect honor, perfect courage, perfect loyalty, perfect self-control. Human nature included fear, weakness, desire, failure. Every samurai spent life navigating gap between these two realities, trying to embody standards nobody could actually meet while maintaining appearance of achieving them. The conflict wasn't flaw in the system, it was inherent feature. Bushido set standards impossibly high precisely because they were meant to be aspirational, to pull samurai towards something greater than ordinary human nature. The point wasn't achieving perfection but striving toward it constantly, never being satisfied with current state, always pushing toward better version of oneself that remained perpetually out of reach. This created immense psychological burden that affected every aspect of existence. Living under constant pressure to embody ideals while knowing you fell short was exhausting. The weight of maintaining honor and reputation never lifted. The vigilance required to avoid shame never ceased. Some samurai thrived under this pressure, using it to achieve extraordinary things. Others buckled under weight they couldn't carry. Most fell somewhere between, functioning, serving, maintaining appearances while privately struggling with very human limitations that could never be openly acknowledged. Yet within this struggle, many samurai found genuine meaning that made the burden worthwhile. The discipline, the training, the bonds with fellow warriors, the sense of purpose and identity. These provided structure and significance. Samurai knew who they were, what they represented, what was expected of them. This clarity had value despite its burden. The purpose found in serving something larger than self, in maintaining traditions, in protecting others, in embodying ideals. This made difficult life feel meaningful. The relationships formed through shared struggle created deep connections that sustained individuals through difficulties. Samurai who trained together, fought together, navigated social complexities together, processed contradictions together, developed bonds that transcended simple friendship. They understood each other's conflicts because they shared them. This mutual understanding created community that provided support no individual could manufacture alone. The modern world can learn from samurai experience, though not necessarily by trying to recreate it. The dedication to discipline, the emphasis on honor and reputation, the importance of serving something larger than self, these principles have value in any context. But also important is acknowledging the cost, the burden, the internal conflict that comes from holding oneself to demanding standards. Perfect balance between ideal and reality may be impossible, but striving toward it while accepting imperfection creates meaning that pure comfort never provides. Thank you for joining this exploration of what it meant to be a samurai. The training, the code, the battles, the contradictions, the relationships, and the meaning found within constant struggle. If you enjoyed this honest look at samurai life beyond romanticized myth, subscribe to see more historical deep dives that present the past as it actually was, with all its complexity and contradiction. There are many more fascinating stories waiting to be told. Let's continue exploring together.